Derek this morning, and I know why now. It's a very worthy crowd. So it's a really tremendous pleasure to be here. You know, we're living in a world where Torah is constantly under attack. We're a minority among minorities, and Torah is constantly under attack. And every once in a while, I think it's refreshing to look at Torah from a different perspective and to see the flows of Torah and the wonders of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in how the Torah itself presents itself to us and how the Torah itself has in it, if not cues, clues, but even strong evidence for its own veracity, for its own integrity. And that's what we talk about a little bit today. We talk about history in the Torah. Now, history in Judaism is very different than the history that is taught elsewhere. Normally, history is taught from a perspective of the past. But when the Torah speaks of history, it speaks of a perspective from the future. The Torah makes predictions. There are all kinds of predictions in Torah. And when you have certain predictions, sometimes they can indicate that the one making the predictions is more than mortal, is more than human. And that's what we're going to look at today. We're going to look at some of these predictions of Torah to see if they give us evidence that the predictor of these predictions is in fact HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's what we're going to do today. So if I were to come to you today and claim that I was a prophet, I'm going to make certain predictions. If I were to come to you and claim that I was a prophet, and as a sign that I'm a prophet, if we go outside to, West Broadway and Central Avenue, that's a good corner, right? Central and Broadway. And we got outside and we were to count cars over a 5-minute period. Being a prophet of God, I predict that about 25 cars will pass. If we go outside, that's exactly what happens. Does that make me a prophet? Certainly not. It could be a very predictable prediction, right? It could be I spent the last, I don't know how many New Year's days on Central Avenue counting cars and I'm over to press you today, right? So I've studied the traffic pattern and I know that that's what's going to happen pretty much. But what if I were to change the prediction just a little bit and tell you that God sent me to speak to it as a sign that God sent me? If we were to stand at that corner for a period of 5 minutes, 27 cars would pass, all of them red Maseratis with black rag tops being driven by drivers who hold no valid driver's licenses and speak no English. You say, well, they're from New York, right? Right? And that's exactly what happens. So there's one of two possibilities. Either I control the situation and make sure that my prediction would happen because I got these people to pass by at precisely that moment because they're a group of Jews I wanted to impress this morning here, right? Either I made it happen, or if it did happen randomly, then I have an inside track. Why? Because my prediction was unpredictable. The first prediction I made was a very predictable prediction. The second prediction is unpredictable. Not only unpredictable, but there were elements of that prediction that contradicted other elements of the prediction. Meaning, what are the chances that people who are driving on the streets of New York hold no valid driver's licenses? What are the chances that all not speaking English when they're in New York City, right? So therefore, I'm giving you contradictory elements of the prediction. And therefore, there's two possibilities. Either I'm controlling the situation, and I made it happen, or if it did happen randomly, then I have to have an inside track. And yes, there's something supernatural about my prediction. The predictions we're going to look at in Torah are of the second variety. They're going to be unpredictable predictions. In fact, some of the predictions contradict others, meaning if set A of predictions is supposed to happen, then set B should not go along with that, should never happen. It just doesn't make sense that that can happen. And that's exactly what we're going to look at today. We're looking at predictions of the Torah. The very first prediction we're going to look at is the prediction that the Jewish people one day would be an eternal nation. I'm going to give you the call-outs. I want you to study them. You did a great job of doing that. I heard the din and the noise here as I passed by. Sounded like you were deeply engrossed in conversations. Okay, call-out number 1 is Bereshis Yud Zayin. Right? That's Bereshis 17:7. This is HaKadosh Baruch Hu speaking to Avraham Avinu. Avraham Avinu is considered the first monotheist, the first Jew. Not really. There was another Marisha. If there was another Marisha, there was another Marisha. There was God. There was another Marisha. That's all there was. Another Marisha was a monotheist. Right? Noah was a monotheist. You listen to Bill Cosby? You know Noah was a monotheist, right? Noah was a monotheist, right? Okay, so what makes Avraham so special? The answer is that by the time Avraham Avinu comes into the world has seemingly forgotten about this monotheism thing. And in fact, he is raised as an idolatrous young man because his father's job was to run an idol shop, right? An idol. His father was an idol merchant. That's I-D-O-L-I-D-L-E merchants was the So there's an idol virgin. They leave the Avram child to the store, right? And Avram Avinu is there taking care of the idols. When his father goes back, when Terach comes back, all the idols are broken. You'll know the story. And Terach tells Avram, "What'd you do to the idol? Why'd you break the idols?" "I didn't break the idols." "So what happened?" He said, "This big nasty looking idol over there." He said, "Yeah." He said something really, really horrible to the other idol over there. And he got really, really upset. So a fight broke out. Before you know it, everybody joined into the fray, and they all broke each other. So he says, "Avram, what's the matter with you? Don't you realize that these idols don't speak, they don't listen, they get insulted, they don't..." Right? Come on, he says, "Well, if they don't listen, why do you pray to them?" Right? You know the story. What's the point of the story? To show how smart and clever Avram Avinu was? No, it's to teach us that Avram is growing up in a world that's completely idolatrous. He pretty much doesn't have a clue about monotheism. But Avram figured it out on his own. Avram becomes the progenitor of the Jewish people because sometimes the Jewish people can inherit their understanding of HaKadosh Baruch Hu through tradition, and sometimes they don't, and therefore you have to figure it out on your own. So he's the perfect progenitor of Klal Yisrael. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu is very enamored of Avram Avinu because Avram Avinu goes ahead and he figures this out on his own. And not only does he figure it out, but he also figures out that if this knowledge is as important as he thinks it is, then he can't withhold it from the rest of the world. What kind of a human being would he be, not teaching the people their tachlis, the very purpose of their lives, which is to be close to God? So at great personal risk, he goes out and he teaches monotheism. And as a reward for that, they threw him into a fiery furnace, which could ruin your whole day, by the way. Right? And HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, not only did you practice it, but you also taught it to others at great personal risk. So too will come from your people one day, whose job it will be to introduce the world to me, to God. Which means as long as there will be people in the world, I will need to have my agent, the Jews, teach them about me. Which means as long as there will be people in the world, there will be Jews to teach them. The Jews will be around forever. Okay? Here's the call. Akimosi as Brisi, I will establish my covenant, between me and you. Uvein Zarecha Acharecha, between your children and you. The Doros son for the generations. L'bris olam, for a forever covenant. Leos l'chol elokim, l'zarecha, to be for you as God, and to your children after you. Bris olam. What is a bris? What is a bris? A covenant. What's a covenant? An agreement. Okay? The covenant is an agreement. How many parties will take up a covenant, an agreement? Minimum of 2 parties. Correct. Very good. Any lawyers here? Okay, any criminals? No, because they also know about contracts. Right? Anyway, so contracts. If one side decides not to keep a contract, all of the things being equal, there will be no special clauses in the contract, is the other side still obligated to uphold the contract. If one side breaks it, we're obligated to the agreement, because the other side still have to keep it. Of course not, unless there's a clause to that effect, right? So maybe, yeah, we get to be around forever as Jewish people if we're teaching the world about God. Maybe when we stop teaching the world about God, the deal is off, and we don't get to end until the end of time. So that's when we give you call out number 2. From Vayikra, Vav, V'af Gamzos. The Torah is speaking at a very dark time in Jewish history. The Torah is speaking, this is the Torah. V'af Gamzos, and even then, the Osam over him, when the Jews will no longer be in Eretz Yisrael because of their sins, they'll be in the lands of their enemies. Lo ma'astim, v'lo ga'atim l'chalasam. I will not reject or obliterate them, to destroy them. Love every single time, to break my covenant with them. Keni Hashem l'keipem. There's a character lahem is Bris Rishon. You know what happened? I told them from going to be around forever, and even when you don't get deserved to do it, because the reason that I gave it to be around forever, which is to teach the world about God, you're not doing that anymore, doesn't make a difference, you'll still be around forever. So this is unconditional. We're supposed to be around forever. The Torah is telling us that Jews are supposed to be around forever. Does this seem to be true? Anybody been to a major airport recently? Anybody been to a major airport? One a couple of blocks away, just a just keep it up. Yeah, what airport is that? You went to Kennedy Airport. Did you see people from many different nationalities? Yeah, you know, there's light people, there's dark people, there's Hispanic people, all different types of languages and skin colors. We are already melting pot. We're very, very good. As Jews, we're extremely open to people. By the way, even in this room, we have people who have, different shades of color and skin. We do. Jews are very, very racist. We come from all different kinds of backgrounds. Because if we were racist, you and I would all look like Ethiopians. That's what I'm probably look like. I came from Macedonia. Right? We don't look like that. Because we're very open to this. But many, many different races there, no question. Did you see any people from India? Pakistan? Yeah, sure. Russia? Because they're ancient, because they're God, right? It's an incredible thing about the Jewish people, that when you go to an airport, even though we were a minority when some vaster and mightier nations already created holidays celebrating our destruction, they're gone and we're here. And that's exactly what Mark Twain speaks about in a wonderful article that he wrote concerning the Jews for Harper's Magazine, 1899. Listen to what he writes. The Egyptian, the Babylonian, and the Persian rose, filled the planet with sound and splendor, then faded to dream stuff and passed away. The Greek and the Roman followed, made a vast noise, and they're gone. Other peoples have sprung up and held their torch high for a time, but it burned out, and they sit in twilight night or have vanished. The Jews saw them all, beat them all, and is now what he always was, exhibiting with evidence, no infirmities of age, no weakening of his parts, no slowing of his energies, no dulling of his alert and aggressive mind. And then Mark Twain, who claimed to have been an agnostic, meaning there's not enough information in the universe to answer yea or nay to the question, is there a God? Inexplicably writes the following. All things are mortal, but the Jew. All other forces pass, and he remains. What is the secret of his immortality? How does the word immortality creep into the lexicon of agnostic? You know, you and I notice that we seem to be around for a long time after we have a right to expect to be, given our size and prominence in world affairs. We know that. We've been around, like, nearly forever. You go to an airport and the other guys are gone, and we're still here. We still poke out and say hi. But maybe because we're Jewish we think that, and maybe a non-Jew would notice that. And yet here Mark Twain saying, you like Mark Clemens, otherwise known as someone who's not particularly Jewish. In fact, in his youth, he seemed to be a pretty robust anti-Semite. Writes about the Jews, all of the forces pass, but what is the secret of his immortality? When he approaches the subject of the Jews, he has no choice but to use a word like immortality, which goes against his philosophy of life. So you and I know this, that we've been around for a long time after we have a right to expect to be. So does Mark Twain, who's not Jewish. But what about unfriendly non-Jews? Mark Twain, in his latter years, became friendly to us. What about unfriendly non-Jews? Do they seem to know that it's a true phenomenon that we hear for a long time after we have a right to expect to be? And even non-Jews who are unfriendly to us, anti-Semitic, would also... Anybody ever hear of a book called The Protocols of the Elders of Zion? Okay, can you tell us, sir, what the book is about? Pass. Anyone else? Anyone give us? Yeah.
It's a conspiration by the Jews will take over the world.
Okay, that the Jews will take over the world. Actually, it purports to be the secret minutes of a meeting that is held every 100 years by the 100 wisest Jews, in which they plan the next 100 years of world history in a manner to benefit the Jews. You know, people like to have all these conspiracy theories that we've taken over the banks and media and communications. That's nothing compared to this. We've taken over history. And it's so absurd because one would think that we planned Hitler, and just to make it look good, we had to kill 6 million of our own. We played the Black Plague of Europe, just to make it look good. We drank for the same wells that supposedly we poisoned, and we died in the same hundreds of thousands that everybody else did. It's the ultimate conspiracy theory about the Jews. They've hijacked history. Where do they get this notion from? And how popular, by the way, is this book? Does anyone know how popular this book? You know this book is a bestseller currently in Japan? Do you know that this book that has weird stuff in it, really weird stuff in it, has been reprinted more times, and has more copies printed than any other book other than the Torah itself? It's been translated to more languages than any other book in history. Who believes this nonsense? And the answer is everybody. And the question is why? Why do they say these horrible things about the Jews? People hate other people as well. People hate Polish people. My parents are Polish. They've heard of the Protocols of the Elders of Krakow? There's a lot of racism going on against African Americans. They've made the Protocols of the Elders of Motown. Like, what is going on here? Why do they say this about us? Where do they get this notion that we are running history? Like, and why would they say that about us? And the answer to that question can only be arrived at if we reconvene here, not as a beautiful learning program, which, by the way, is beautiful. See, parents and children see, this is a beautiful sight for eyes to behold. They should come up to Rabbi Friedman in the school. What a wonderful idea. But we're going to reconvene as a convention of anti-Semites. And you have been sent here by your anti-Semitic neighbors because you best represent their hatred And we are all here, this is the opening session of this convention, and I'm your chairman, and to get into the proper mood of anti-Semitism and hatred, I'm going to ask each of you to think about, consider, and publicly proclaim the worst racial slur you can about the Jews. What's the worst you can say about, just to get ourselves in a good spirit, just to get ourselves in the mood of this convention? What would people say at this type of convention? What's the worst thing you can say about the Jewish people? Say something really awful. I'm sorry, raise your hand. I can see you. What would they say? What would you hear at this type of convention? Maybe someone said cheap? Yeah, okay, all right, that's not bad. It's not bad, we can better than that. Let's get really good. They're greedy. Okay, kind of goes hand in hand with cheap. Can you do better than that? This is a national convention. This is not some local, hillbilly club here. This is a national convention. Come on, let's get really big. What's the worst they say about us? Sons of the devil. Now we're getting close. They what? They killed God. That's wonderful. By the way, how do you kill a God? When he's not looking at you, come up and be running a boom, right? So what? It doesn't make sense. Okay, but you know what? It'll play well for Orion. Thank you very much, sir. This room on the Presidium for a fellow like you. You got talent. Okay. 5 Towns Got Talent. Good show, right? Fantastic. That's excellent. Thank you. Give me another one like that. Come on. Next that's coming up. Come on. They kill little Christian babies and drink their blood. That's right. That's what they say about us. I don't believe it. They don't believe it. Egypt had this tremendous story that was racing through all the papers a few years ago, Purim time, that we use blood of Gentiles to make hamantash. I never knew that. I didn't know they even knew about hamantash. All right, in Iran, I figured they knew, but in Egypt, that's what he said. Forget for a moment we're the only people in the world who prohibit the ingestion of any blood, human or otherwise. Forget that. Right? But you know what? People believe it. Sounds fantastic. It's terrific. Someone actually repeated this on an Oprah show a number of years ago. Probably was the person who repeated it happened to be herself Jewish. She said it was true. Everybody, this is incredible to say these things. What's the one racial slur they'll never say about us at this type of convention? What's the one thing that's negative, that could be negative about the Jews, they'll never say it? What don't they say? What don't they say about us to insult us? Let's try it. Stupid. Just listen to how this plays out. They killed God. Wow, that's terrific. They killed Christian children, drink their blood. That's fantastic. They're stupid? Where's your sense of decorum, sir? Why don't they say that about us? Because there seems to be this notion that Jews are smart. There are two things they seem to know about us, which delivers us into the hands of the protocols of the elders of Zion. They know we're smart, and number two, they see that we've been around for a long time after the right to expect to be in our signs and promises and all affairs. So if it's not God who's running history and manner to benefit the Jews, those smart Jews have figured out how to do it by themselves. The protocols of the elders of Zion. We know this from around for a long time. Friendly Gentiles know this, and even those who hate our guts, they know this too. Okay. So maybe we've been around for a long time, not because of any kind of supernatural intervention, but perhaps this is something very predictable for Jewish people. Why? Because what goes into the making of a nation? What broad ingredients, social ingredients, go into the making of a nation where people decide to take on a common Virginian identity? So there's a fellow who was pretty healthy, as I said by himself. His name is Arnold Toynbee. Arnold Toynbee is a historian who seems to have had an anti-Semitic slant, although he cannot figure out why Christianity has to get accepted the rest of Judaism. He actually just discovered that a statement of his, I saw on YouTube just the other day, shockingly, he can't figure it out because obviously that, we are the true religion. That's what he said. But anyway, he was an anti-Semite. He said very wrong things about us as well. Arnold Toynbee says there are three broad ingredients that go into the making of a nation. A people who are living with a commonality of geography, a land, a language, and a history or a culture will take on for themselves a common but unique identity. How do you become a country? You have the combination of land, language, and history in common. If you have those things in common, you're going to become a nation. Okay, let's see if the Jews qualify. Do we have a land in common as Jews? What land would that be? Israel, great. Do we have a language in common as Jews? What language would that be? Hebrew, excellent. Do we have a history in common? Sir? I have to disagree speaks about a land, language, and history in common, does he speak about a land from which we come hundreds or even 1,000 years ago? Or is he speaking of where you live? For the vast majority of our history, the vast majority of people did not live in Israel. It's unfortunate. We always had a presence there. We were always there. We never lived in the land. But the vast majority didn't. Language? Well, what is your primary language of communication, my friends? You all speak Hebrew? Right? So when he's talking about language, he's not talking about a key to an ancient document called the Torah or the language we use for prayers. He's talking about what we use to communicate. For the vast majority of our history, we did not use Hebrew as our primary language of communication. History, certainly the further back you go, the more we share in terms of history. But you must admit to me that the Jew living in downtown Manhattan has more in common with his neighbor across the way in land, language, and history than he has with his cousin living in Marrakesh. And yet the two of them, in 2012 and 13, insist on calling themselves Jew, despite the fact that we have less in common of land, language, and history than anybody else. So it's not that explains why we're around together. If anything, despite all of that, we're still happy to be around. Okay, maybe there's something as to how nations disappear that leads us to go through the process. What is the process by which nations lose their identity? Well, if land is how you get this.
They fight larger countries and they lose.
They fight large countries. That's called conquest. Very good, excellent. Conquest. If it's land, language, and history, the opposite of land, I guess, is conquest, where the land is taken away from you. Conquest. What's the end result? What happens when you lose your identity? What is that process called? Assimilation. How do you go from being a conquered people to being an assimilated people? And this doesn't only apply to Jewish, it's called persecution. Not only to the Jews, this is universal. It's universal that when you have a strong country, an extra weaker country, they see an opportunity to go in and make a land grab. They come into the country, they notice the people in the country are different than they are. They speak differently, they dress differently, they have funny accents when they try to mimic your language. So you deny the right that you would take for yourself, that you take for granted for yourself, and you persecute them. This happens to everybody. It's called the dislike of the unlike. It's universal. If you don't know about this, it's something very important to learn. Because when we forget that people have this notion of the dislike of the unlike, that's when we get into a lot of trouble. When we think somehow the world is coming to a better place, and there is no such thing anymore, dislike of the unlike, that's when we get into trouble. Dislike of the unlike means, if I see you and you look very differently than me, I'm not automatically going to assume that you're superior to me, but I'm going to assume you are inferior. Okay, guys, you can relate to this one. So you've been going to high school reunions for 10 years in a row. You love the you're not going. You're getting tired of counting other people's wrinkles. Get a life, right? Love you're not going to go. So your wife calls you up and says, "You're not going this year? Jackie's in here. You know your friend Jack? Jack's going to be there this year. Jack, my old buddy Jackson, he was never there before. Come on, he's coming. You really should come to him." I said, "Okay, I'm going to go." So you come into the reunion, you look around for Jack, you can't find Jack. Except suddenly, out of the corner of your eye, you notice that there's this figure that's dressed in long white, flowing robes. And he's bent down in a very reverent type of position. And he's wearing this big turban with a big bow underneath. And you look at him, and you say, "Jack?" And he says, "God bless you, my Jack." You say, "Jack, you and I grew up, we were neighbors down the road, you were just like me. You look like that, I look like this, one of us is nuts." Can that be you? We see people who have reacted to conditions very differently than we have reacted. We don't automatically assume that they're superior. We assume that they're inferior. It's called the dislike of the unlike. So the people conquering countries, these people look funny, dress funny, talk funny. They deny them the right they take for granted for themselves. Eventually, some people in the population, the conquered country, they get wind of this. They figure it out. They say, "You know why I'm being discriminated against? Because I look differently. If I were to look more like my captor, he would like me more." And we begin to adapt the mannerisms, the mode of dress of our captors. Now what happens is that it works like a charm. And eventually the identity of one people has melted into the identity of the other people, and their identity is gone. Conquest, persecution, assimilation. Have we as Jews figured this out and tried this methodology? Many times. It's a fascinating question that talks about this. Many times. It's the way of the Jew, certainly when he is in exile, that somehow things are very different, very difficult when he first comes into this foreign nation. He's denied rights, and they find a way, these Jews, to ingratiate themselves with the powers that be. Did you know that Poland had a Jewish king for a day? How many of you knew that Poland had a Jewish king for a day? We were so close to Malchus in Poland that no one, when there was a vacuum in the position for a few days, they didn't trust any Gentile to occupy the position temporarily, and they put in a Jew because they could be the only one to get back the throne, and he did. We had ingratiated ourselves with people of power in almost every society, and eventually we managed to do well within those societies. When we started to do well in those societies, they stopped discriminating against us. When they stopped discriminating against us, we start to assimilate. We start to assimilate. We should be allowed to assimilate into oblivion. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, Bris Allah, you're going to be around forever, even if you don't want to be. At the point where we give up, the most recent and tragic occurrence of this is, of course, World War II. For 1,000 years, Jews were not allowed to enter European universities. Many countries couldn't own land or have regular jobs. And suddenly, Jewish emancipation swept through Europe. And certainly in the early 1800s, the middle 1800s, Jews were offered, simply drop your differences and we will accept you. The reason we hated you is with a dislike of the unlike. Become more like us and we will like you more. And there were two responses to that. There was one response from a large segment of the Jewish population that said, yes, we're going to resign. We renounce our Jewish culture for that of the higher German culture. Germany is our fatherland, Berlin our Jerusalem. That's a quote. They were led to be known as before. It's a quote, direct quote. And there's another group that said, thanks, but no thanks. We have a feeling that it's our differences that's kept us all these years. And if we were to drop our differences, like today's march, Israel, how about you, Mitzrayim? So they didn't drop their mode of dress, the language that they spoke, nor their Hebrew names. Or Soloveitchik says, how do you know, where does it say in the Pasuk? How about him? They still look like they just stepped off the boat. They never dropped it. They retained their mannerisms. Soloveitchik's a beautiful part, right? So we say, that's why we're here. Otherwise, we wouldn't even be here. So Group A that accepted it, within 2 generations, they didn't know themselves who was Jewish anymore. There was so much intermarriage. Yes, in Europe, in Germany, there's a tremendous amount of intermarriage. Group B. So what happens to Group A when the vast majority of people decide they're going to assimilate and become parcel of the Jewish culture, and they're going to become their lawyers, and their doctors, and their university professors, and their great literary experts? We were. And they're composers, they're musical composers. We should have been allowed to become real Germans. But instead, the exact reason that was given for anti-Semitism prior to that point, for 1,000 years, we hate you because you're different, comes a new form of anti-Semitism. We hate you because you're the same. You see, you're polluting the pure Aryan race. Well, wasn't that the entire point? That's what you asked us to do. We married you to it. We took positions on the points. And now you see, they should have been allowed to assimilate to oblivion. And the Baruch Hu says, no. You do it Bris Allah. How many of you belong to NCSY? One of my favorite NCSY sayings is, when the Jews stop making Kiddush, the Gentiles begin to make Halal. Right. It's incredible. We're not going to be allowed to retreat into oblivion. But it's not going to happen because we're going to be the Amolim, living forever. First prophecy we look at in Torah is that we're going to be around forever. Bris Olam, as long as there are people in the world, we're going to be around as well. So, perhaps, the fellow who made this prediction was a human prophet still. We're going to play devil's advocate here. And the reason he's able to somehow feel comfortable making a prophecy like that is because most nations don't get to be around forever. The mighty Soviet Union only lasted 72 years. But the reason he said we'd be the exception is because he understood that the way a nation disappears is first through conquest. So maybe he thought the Jews would be such amazing warriors and fighters that no one could wrest the land from their grasp. And that's why we'd be around forever. Well, the next category of prophecy we'll look at is going to give the lie to that one. And we're going to look at the prophecy of exile and dispersion. Golus and Pizor. Golus and Pizor. Okay, we're looking at Vayikra. We're looking at Vayikra Chavav, Pasuk Lavagim. Eschem Ezoreh Vayim, and you I will scatter among the nations. Varikosi Akarechem Kerem. I will draw the sword after you. Your land will be laid waste, and your cities will be desolate. The Torah says that we are going to be exiled from the land. How are you supposed to be around forever if you don't have a land to be around forever in? Is exile a normal occurrence in history? When people are conquered, do people normally go ahead and exile the inhabitants of the land? And the answer is never. It's expensive. You might want to kill off the previous leadership of the land to make sure that no threat exists against the new leadership. But then what you want to do is you want to subjugate the people to work the land for you and send all of its assets back to the conquering land. This is how it's done in history. You don't exile people. It's silly. And yet the Torah says we'll be exiled. The land must first be rid of them. The Tiretz is Shabbat, so that in his desolation they make up this most Shabbat. Vashama Mehem. Because in my precepts they spurn, and my precept and warn my statutes. The Torah is telling us that the Jews are going to be exiled. It doesn't make sense that Jews should be exiled. And where they do live, they will not have any peace at all. It goes on and on. The Torah tells us that we'll not only be exiled, but we're also going to be dispersed. What does it mean to be dispersed? Dispersion absolutely never takes place. It doesn't make sense that any congregation want to disperse anybody. If you're going to exile some people, exile. But why are you dispersing people? And yet, if you look at any map of Jewish populations throughout history, we were dispersed in about 150 different places, and in small numbers. What are the chances that small groups of people dispersed in foreign lands, totally powerless, get to retain their identity, and they're the bris Allah? Who is this strange prognosticator? Who is the strange historian who's writing a history of the Jewish people that we're going to be around forever, and we're going to be exiled, and just to really make it difficult, we'll be dispersed in many different nations? Who wrote this stuff? How does this make sense? All right, if it was God, he could make sure that history matches whatever predictions he made. Or, in the future, each of those works for us. But if it's a human being, why would he want to say something like this about us? And having said it, how does he get history to see him right? Who is the author of this Torah? Is it a human being or is it God? What makes more sense to us? So you might say, okay, he said exile and dispersion, the fact is come true, but you know what? Maybe he thought, erroneously, it's really a human being, but maybe the prophet thought, whoever he was, that you know what, the Jews living in all these countries being dispersed, they'd be so beloved. In whichever country they live, we'd all be seen as, Jackie Mason-like stand-up comedians and given a special status and allowed to flourish and get grants from the National Institute of the Arts, all right? We'd roll really, really well, right? We're so lucky because the next carrier prophecy we look at is that when we are in the Gulf, anti-Semitism is incredible. It is predicted that the Jews will suffer anti-Semitism worse than anybody else, more maybe than anybody else. Those who are left of you, I shall make so faint-hearted, the lands of their enemies, and leaves rustling behind them will seem like it's chasing them. They'll run away as though the sword is after them. They'll live a perfectly schizophrenic existence, terrified every single moment. The hatred that is visited upon the Jews is incredibly different than the hatred upon other people. The people were happy to call them names and throw them sticks and stones. But with the Jews, over and over again, we are gathered and exterminated. Not just once. A number of times in history, we've been gathered and exterminated. How could you predict for people that are going to be around forever? If they're not going to have a country to be around forever, they're going to be dispersed throughout the world. On top of that, there'll be anti-Semitism, anti-Jewish hatred worse than they. Professor Michael Curtis, looking at anti-Semitism at a colloquium that he held in Israel in 1987, spoke about the hatred of the Jew is different than every other hatred in its intensity, in its longevity, and even in its unreasonableness. Jews are hated for opposite reasons at the same time. Right now, there's an organization in Russia called Pamyat. Pamyat is an ultra-nationalist fascist group. They're very anti-Semitic. And there's a hate letter campaign underway to scare the Jews off from the big cities in Russia. And they send out letters to the Jews saying, we're going to come and get you and kill you. You know why? Because you guys are responsible for the founding of communism. And also for the introduction of perestroika. You guys are awful, you know why? Because you're a warlike people and also people of the book. Well, which one is it? Hitler hated us because we were usurping the wealth of Germany, we're all rich, right? And parasites at the same time. We're hating when we're smart, we're hating when we're stupid, right? You can't look at the reasons he gave anti-Semites for hatred of the Jews because those are excuses. Those are all excuses. It seems that they try to raise their finger to the wind and see which way public opinion is blowing. Whatever the public hates at that point in time is what they claim about the Jews. In fact, the German attitude towards the Jews really does not make sense, and let's illustrate the following story. There was a Jew, his name was the Amsterdam Rebbe. The Amsterdam Rebbe had this idea during World War II that he could save many, many Jews if he found a way for the Jews to be able to escape Europe to Japan. As you know, there was a great Hatzalah of an entire yeshiva in Europe, the Mary Yeshiva, that escaped and they saved their lives. But initially, he asked for and received some 50 visas from the Japanese government to allow Jews to escape what would become ultimately the butchery of the Jews and find a place to live. And when those Jews arrived in Japan, the Germans were outraged. The Japanese were their allies. And they're giving safe haven to Jews. So they went ahead and they took all of the terrible, horrific things they said about the Jews, all the propaganda they used to write about the Jews, translated into Japanese, and said all that stuff that was there for the consumption of the German public to get them to hate the Jews, and said all of that to the Japanese. The Japanese read it, understood it, and issued 50,000 more visas. They said, these are the kind of people we like to do business with. What? They run the banks? They're successful. These are companies. We need a good middle class. It's a true story, by the way. I mean, if I do all these things, you shouldn't necessarily hate me. You should love. Some people you hate, some people you love, but how can you love and hate people for opposite reasons at the same time? Anti-Semitism doesn't even make any sense. And yet that's what the Torah says is going to happen. The hatred of the Jew has certainly been worse than the hatred of any other people throughout history. Did you know that we were thrown out of every country in which we lived? Did you know that Jews living in the north were expelled to the south of the United States of America during the Civil War who were accused of being Southern spies? Happened in this country. Have any idea how many times we were expelled from England? It's more than once. How many Holocausts occurred in Europe? It was more than one. Every country which we've ever lived has expelled us. It's like, we don't take showers. Like, which one? Torah predicts anti-Semitism. When the Torah predicts something, you can back up. Okay, so perhaps the prophet is still a human being, but he can make these kind of predictions for a whole other reason. Perhaps he thought erroneously that the Jewish people would be vast in their numbers. You see, the final prophets are really looking out at the very edge, at the very end of the Holy Roman Empire. The population of the Roman Empire was approximately 44 million people. 10% of them were comprised of Jews. About 4.5 million Jews when the Holy Roman Empire comes to an end. So perhaps the prophet looks at this and he says, you know what? Those who are going to hail from the Holy Roman Empire will number in the year 2013, I don't know, some 2 billion people, which is accurate. If 10% of them are going to be Jews, there'll be 200 million Jews. 200 million Jews aren't disappearing anywhere. Despite the fact that anti-Semitism and exile dispersion, they're not going anywhere. There'll be so many Jews, and that's why we'll be around till the end of time. Well, we're not so lucky because the next category of prophecy we undertake to examine is that we were going to be few in number. Because Baruch says we're going to be the Shartim of the same lot, that's the farm that you looked at before. The Shartim of the same lot, you were made few in the Takas HaShayisim to Kafei Shemayim Rome. You could have been as numerous as the stars of the heaven. Kilo Shemanu B'Kol Hashem L'Kevli, not listen to the voice of God. When we are in the condition of exile, when we're not listening, and we're not living in the land of Israel, we're going to be few in number. How do you accomplish this feat of being few in number when you're an ancient people? Did you know there was a time that we had achieved rough population parity with the Chinese? Yes, there was once the same number of Jews as there were Chinese. And the Chinese boat takes off like a shot. And we never ever number any more than about 17 million people in all of our history. How does that happen? Why haven't we grown? And the answer is, Rabbi Berl in his wonderful series of Jewish history tells us there were 10 cataclysmic events in Jewish history whereby the majority of the people living in one generation don't get to populate the next one. Whether it's pogroms, forced conversions, wars, holocausts. 10 times in history. The Jews living in one generation, the majority of them don't. There was one time that there are going to be cataclysmic events that happen to them that prevent them from having a normal population. It's predicated on the fact that at some point, 90% go away. If 90% of the people can go away, what leaves you so rock solid sure that of the other 10%, you get to create an eternal nation? What have you in mind? If 90% go away, so the 10% can go away. Who is this guy? Who's this rocket scientist who's making these strange predictions? Having made them, how does history see them right? What makes more sense? Let's boom up the Torah. Wasn't God, was a human being? If it was God, okay, God can do anything he wants. Or as a human being, why would he want to make such predictions? And having made these predictions, how does history get to see them right? Who wrote the book? Okay, so maybe the prophet thought, we might be few in number, we might be hated worse than anybody else, but maybe somehow the prophet thought that we would be very quiet people, we would live in great secrecy. You never hear from, the Jews, we're very quiet, we're not opinionated, you never hear about us in the media, we're really quiet. Maybe he thought erroneously that the Jews were allowed somehow to be allowed to go on in history in a very quiet way, kind of blend in with the woodwork. Well, that's not what happens, because the next prophecy we look at is actually predicted for us that we are going to be an Or L'Amim, we're going to be a light unto the nations. In Yeshayahu, Ani Hashem Karsimcha B'tzedek, I call you righteousness Ka'ech, V'achazek Yodech, and I held you by the hand that Tzarchov and called the bris, Am L'Orim B'Yim, will be a light unto the nations. Listen to how unlikely this is. We are the people that the world loves to hate, and we're going to be a light unto the nation. We're going to give wisdom to the world. We're going to teach the world. It doesn't make any sense at all. In fact, the people the world loves to hate, we should accept anything from those people. And the lessons, philosophies that we have taught the world has truly changed the world more than any other people in the history of humankind. It's incredible the contributions we have made to world history. Did you know that there was no such thing as a nation that extolled peace as a higher ideal than war until us? You know that vast center and bastion of Jewish sympathy located on the east side of Manhattan called the United Nations? They love us. Don't they love us? That's terrific. 175 resolutions all passed the only democracy in the Middle East. Most of the human rights violations. It's incredible. It's incredible. They really, really don't like us. Now, when they were founded, they didn't like us either. There were certain founding United Nations who really were not friends of the Jewish state. And yet, when it came time for them to create a plaza opposite the United Nations, which is currently called Dag Hammarskjöld Plaza, they were looking for a pithy statement, for a pithy saying of antiquity, to engrave in the wall opposite the United Nations, right in front of the little garden. And they looked into many different cultures and many different histories. And they're looking for one pithy saying that would say that peace is a good thing. And the only one they found came from Yeshayahu, they shall beat their swords into plowshares. Why? And the answer is because no one else thought that peace was a good idea in those days. Glory was when you kind of captured your enemy, cut open his chest, and ripped down his still beating heart. That was like glorious. You know, with us it's equal with Simcha Ella for Rama Bibinecha. Please God, I hope I don't have to touch the gun. Like, just kill him, I can do it, right? It's the antithesis of what heroism is. We're the only people in the world, all of whose heroes are bookworms. David Amelech was a great warrior, but he's remembered more for Tillim than anything else. The concept of universal education, where did that come from? It's called university, oh yeah? You try to get it without a bank account. We have universal education. We have universal literacy for thousands of years. There were French philosophers that made fun of us that we had the audacity to teach our daughters how to read. How weird. Universal, in this country, United States of America, we have right now 35% functional illiteracy. 35% of people don't ever read well enough to do their jobs appropriately. It's the New York Times got a year. 50% of the country, 50 years ago, in England, of Appalachia, another place, could not read. 50%. We have universal literacy from day one. The concept of charity. The world taught might makes right. You know, we taught the world might makes responsibility. If you're stronger, you're meant to take care of someone who's weaker. That's us. All of these concepts being dedicated to the sanctity of human life, even if it's tiny, even if it's unborn, and by the way, certainly if it's born. And what were children used in ancient times? Cannon fire, from entertainment and other things, which we're not going to speak ancient Rome, Greece, bring children. There were certain islands off the British mainland that refused to accept Christianity 600 years ago. They were holdouts because they wanted to retain the right to kill their children under Christianity. They could go away with their children. In ancient Greece and Rome, the preferred method of population control was exposure. A child that was not particularly wanted was allowed to die, to start with that, to be exposed. And which great ancient Greek philosopher wrote out against the practice? That's correct, nobody. They all defended it. In a very Spockian way, they said, the needs of the many supersede the needs of the few. Remember that line? That's where it comes from. Every single human being was created back on the world by God. You don't have the right to decide who's important, more important. Young, old, male, female, doesn't make a difference. Money, not money, doesn't make a difference. It's a Jewish idea. We taught it to the rest of the world. Nobody had it. We had laws against chopping down trees when people were chopping down people for breakfast, for entertainment in the Colosseum. What do you think they were doing for entertainment? The fountains in the Colosseum used to spray out water, but perfume. Why? Because people would come to have picnics in the Colosseum while they watched people being torn apart, limb from limb, by either wild animals or gladiators. And there was such a stench of blood in the air that people would gag and couldn't eat their food. So they used to spray perfume from the fountains. And we taught the world that human life is precious, even if it's your captive. Our God, we taught the world all of these things. What are the chances that the people that the world loves to hate get to be so successful in its message? Like zero? Who's writing this stuff? Who's making it up as they go along? What person in his right mind could write a series of predictions like this for people and get away with it? Could be right. Who wrote the book? What makes more sense to thinking, sane, rational people in 2013? Look at two more categories of prophecy. The first one is the interdependence between the land of Israel and the people of Israel. It is predicted Shmos Gimel, "V'eirei latzilo miyad Mitzrayim l'somen ha'aretz ha'hi al eretz tova rochava, al eretz tova s'kol l'tvash." Anybody know anything about the fertility of the land of Egypt, certainly around the Nile? It's considered to be, what's the name for that area shaped like a moon, I guess, right? The fertile crescent, right? Very fertile. We know all about the blessings of Egypt. Egypt was really a world storehouse of food because it was a fertile crescent, right? So Hashem says, I'll take them out of that land, Egypt, to a really good land. Eretz tova, you think this land is good? Wait till you see Israel. Israel's going to be even better. So the Torah is predicting that Israel is a very fertile place. In Egypt, Yashem would have to be out of Eretz Tova. Hashem's bringing you to a good land. Eretz Nachlim Hoyim, Ayanos is a homosexual Bahar. A land with a tremendous amount of fertility. Eretz Chita is over, Begethem, Pena Barimon, Eretz Zeitz, Shem, and Vash. I'm going to bring you to a land that's really, really great. You think Egypt is something, it's nothing compared to this land. How have we just established that it is the Torah's opinion that Israel is a fertile land? We have, no question. Over and over again, I'm not telling you anything that's only taking out of context, just to try to make a point. It's clear that Torah says it's fertile land. But did I say it's a fertile land? Oh, I must have been mistaken. Let's look at Vayikra, Chavav. The land so devastated, and your enemies will be astonished. Voice your land will be waste, and your cities are ruined. Wait a second. We just said the land is going to be a beautiful land. What does it mean that it's going to be a wasteland? Like, how does that happen? So the Ramban tells us this is a prophet in disguise. What's the prophet in disguise? He says, you really think that Israel is a beautiful land because it's very fertile on its own. It's not true. When the Jews live in the land gives its fruit. When it does not, when the Jews do not live in the land refuses to give its fruit. So that any enemy who takes hold of the land will not be able to have any kind of long-term relation with the land. It just won't support that. Isn't that a beautiful Maimar Chazal? Beautiful. But you have to wonder, since when does a land care who lives on it? Can you imagine the original settlers who came to this country? They immediately they saw these old red Americans, these Indians that were there, and they did what any country does. They go ahead and they take vast numbers of the population and kill them off, and others they put on little reservations. And there's a buck private in Her Majesty's Army. He goes to a superior and says, "Excuse me, sir." He says, "What is it?" He says, "You can't do that." He says, "Come to what? You can't kill the natives of the land will refuse to give its fruit. He says, speaking of the fruit, it's not okay. Yeah, fine. What, to get the land to produce fruit, you take your car with the magnetic stripe in the back, you stick it in the ground, the right identity, fruit comes up, otherwise it doesn't come up. This is strange. This is strange, and yet this is exactly what happens to our land. For hundreds of years, the Jews live in the land of Israel, and they have tremendous, enormous produce that's produced in it. You talk about the time of Gemara, you talk about the time even times of before, prior to the Gemara, you talk about times of rock. It's unbelievable, the land produces. The Jews live in the land produces. And then they come into the land, you know, the Turks, the Ottoman Empire, ruled the land for 600 years. The Turks are great farmers. They are great farmers, I can tell you that. A lot of great things that grow in the Turkish countryside, some of them illegal, but they're great farmers. Unbelievable farmers. They take care of the land for 600 years and nothing grows. It becomes a wasteland. There's nothing there. And then the Jews come back to the land. And these people who have been prohibited from owning land, it's not like they were born with green thumbs. They didn't know which way was up in a rake. They come into the land of Israel and becomes an agricultural wonderland. Israel is the largest producer of flowers in Europe today. Look at those Jaffa armies out there. They're great, right? It's magical. It's magical. It doesn't make sense. Some people say it's self-fulfilling prophecy, you know? The people say they make the land grow, but you don't know how to make the land grow. You can't make the land grow. And the Jews transformed the land to an agricultural paradise. A number of years ago, I worked with a hospital in Israel, running our hospital, Netanya. And I used to go to Washington every other month to try to persuade certain members of our elected officials to take some of the United States USAID money, which is foreign aid, and try to support the hospital. Because you might not know this, the foreign aid money that's voted in different countries, the first crack at that money is given to American entities abroad in those countries. We were an American entity, we would go, and I got to know a lot of the senators. Someone said, you know what, you really should go see this particular senator. Was the chairman of the Senate Agriculture Committee. Now, he's a guy from the South. He seems to love Israel despite the fact he never met really Jews in his life, but he's a very sweet guy. You should go see him, maybe he'll support your request. So I went to see him. I got into the room. He should excuse me, he was a redneck. And when I walked in the room, it wasn't pretty. You know, I kind of like looked for him, I kind of looked Jewish. It wasn't pretty. And it did this uncomfortable silence in the room. And after a moment or so, he looks at me and he said, "Do you know about Allah, Jews?" I said, "No, sir." He said, "You know I like Jews because your buddies in Israel, they could plant seeds in this here floor," which was a mosaic floor in the Senate, "and the flowers blooming by morning. We become the agricultural experts despite the fact we didn't know which way was up in a rake." Torah makes predictions. Since when can we predict that the land cares who lives on it? That's exactly what the Torah says. Who makes this prediction? Who wrote the book? And then finally, it's predicted that the Jews will one day return to the land. Kibbutz Galilee, the Devarim. V'shav Hashem lekecha sh'yosefah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu shall return you from your captivity, and he will return you and collect you from all the nations. You were dispersed. He has to collect you from different countries. But he's going to do that. How many nations in history have ever been exiled like nobody? Dispersed? Certainly nobody. How many people, even small groups of people, once they were exiled, get to go back to their homeland? 0. And we do it twice. Once after the 70-year exile, and another time in the lifetime of many of us, when the New York Times had written off the fledgling state of Israel as being a country that could not have it, because no people could have their moral fiber so crushed by the Nazis as we suffered and still have the ability to conduct our own affairs, rising as a phoenix from the still warm ashes. The state of Israel was born. It didn't make sense. It's never happened in history. In history, it's never happened. We have Jews today from 150 different countries living in the state of Israel. So some people say, well, we're just better equipped. There are people revising history every day and say, oh, we got more weapons, the Arab did. Let me tell you how we took the land, if you don't mind. A deeply personal story. They had guns, they had some planes, crop dust, but that's some planes. We had my Uncle Itzik. Uncle Itzik was a Holocaust survivor who arrived in the United States of America in 1947 with my grandfather, having just survived. 3 of his siblings never made it. country, he boards like a slow banana boat, steals away from the house without my grandfather's knowledge, and goes to Israel to help fight. And when he came back, he said, let's tell us about how you fought the war. How did you fight the war? It was so miraculous in the state of Israel. He said, how we fought the war? It's simple, you fought with a tractor. I said, how do you fight with a tractor? It's very easy. You take the shovel and you put it up, that way any bullets coming towards it, hopefully you can stop by the shovel. And then you take a bottle of milk, and how many bottles of milk you fill half with water, because gasoline is very expensive. Yeah, then you fill gasoline, you take a little piece of your shirt, you put it on top, you light it, and you throw it. And we won! It's never happened that any group of people exiled from the nation ever get to retain their identity and come back and live there again. And you and I are witnessing this with our own eyes today. What makes more sense to the book? Two possibilities. It's either you and me contrived. If it's you and me, why would he make such wild predictions and how he made them? How does history get to see him right? Or is it a country law? I'll leave it to your fertile imaginations to answer that question. Have a wonderful day. Thank you. I brought a few answers here.
In terms of Morocco, the fruits were organs and chemical.
That's a great question. It's an excellent question. The Moroccan